Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to finish up this week with a full album review, checking out each track from an album one by one, exploring what they're doing in isolation and their aspect, the parts that work in the larger art as a whole. Today we're going to be looking at The Blue, an album from November. I did a little bit of digging into the band as I usually do just to kind of make sure I'm in the right headspace for these. And I found out that they are sort of all over the place, sort of always having a foot in the progressive metal door, but also kind of having the other foot in a lot of different areas. Gothic metal, doom metal, death doom metal, sometimes just straightforward prog metal. This one in particular seems to be a return to a more doomish style after more of a straightforward progressive uh, album. That, according to a couple of things I was reading, was a welcome return to an older sound with some of the ideas that they had learned from their previous couple of albums. So, with that said, let's dive into this. Probably looking at something rather moody, a little doomy. We're going to kick it off with Anaemia. Let's dive in. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what to think about this yet. I do like those harmonies though. A little bit of falsetto is nice. It's always interesting when you check the time real quick so you can pause it and you realize you just entered a guitar solo with 5 seconds to go, and you're like, oh, geez, this is going to move right into the next track here. I'm going to have to remember 9 minutes of music to discuss this at least. And then it just stops. What a peculiar little track here. I feel like there were a lot of fake outs. The track starts off with the I don't remember if it was a clean guitar or acoustic guitar line. Nice little single line idea that comprises harmony and a melodic element and a rhythmic component all in one. And then it quickly crossfades with a very heavy distorted guitar sound. I like this crossfade, not particularly because of the crossfade itself, but the way that the electric guitar comes in and the sound gets fuller every 4 bars. It isn't, I think volume wise, it is a smooth transition. The volume is gradually increasing in a linear rate, but there's something about the width of the guitar tone that we get in these 4 bar pulses where the width goes here, 2, 3, 4, here, 2, 3, 4, here, and it just keeps getting bigger every bar in this step fashion. And I find that to be really interesting because every time I felt that we had reached the new width, the new depth as well, its resonance in the lower range increased with each bar as well. It just became a larger sound in pretty much every axis. And it was just very cool to hear that kind of transition. But it also happened relatively quickly. We were listening to this this acoustic guitar line, and was only around for like 10 seconds before the crossfade began to happen. And it kind of sounded like there was a second guitar that was going to take up the melodious aspect of it. But something happened and we kind of lost that somewhere in the transition. But it almost makes the beginning feel it's a strange decision, I'll say, to introduce on the one idea and quickly remove it. But then we come in with the guitars, the drums come in. There is a bass guitar somewhere in there, but it is buried in the mix. I could feel it, but I couldn't really hear it. I think most of the time it was doing what the guitars were doing, and the guitars were already filling up so much of the low end that the bass sort of is an extra little bit of oomph down there and not really a dominant force. The vocals come in, growls. Well, technically I think fry screams, but whatever, harshes come in. And I'm like, okay, I'm listening to it. I'm like, this isn't bad. Uh, I, an hour, an hour and 7 minutes. Is that what we have today? Yeah, 67 minutes. I was thinking this might be a bit rough. This might be an album I need to take a break in the middle and come back to the back half a bit refreshed. Um, but that was only around for like 30 seconds, and then the cleans came in, and we kind of went to, I don't know, it's kind of got like an emo vibe to it. Post-hardcore even kind of with the way that the vocal harmonies work together. I mean, it's almost like if we had pop emo style vocals on top of some sort of Gazey adjacent guitar work. It's very moody, very atmospheric, but the vocals are kind of, I don't know if bright's the word for it. I guess poppy. They're like a poppy ballad, I suppose. The intervals even feel a bit poppier than I would expect, especially given some of the guitar chords we heard coming up to this, which really rooted themselves in a little bit more complexity and uh, melancholy. And then we get these vocal intervals. Um, and it's just a really smooth sound to my ears. I really dig it. But there was that moment there when we had more of the death style of playing, and I was like, man, this is something. I might have to take a break. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to listen to this album all the way through without being fatigued throughout it. So I had two little fake outs there. I liked the intro and they switched it out for something else, and I felt that might have been a bit draining, and then he switched it out for something that took over the rest of the track. I really feel like the back, I mean, what, 3 minutes of this 4.5 minute track, a vast majority of it is a very different style than the two things we were introduced to. And that's this whole idea of false starts. I don't know what the rest of the album's going to be like. That's kind of terrifying. Usually I listen to the first track, maybe it's an intro track, so the second track, but the first proper song, and I usually have a pretty good idea of what I'm getting into. In here, I'm not really sure. They kind of showcase three ideas and stuck on one that feels like it's the odd man out, but it is the majority of this track. And so I have no idea where they're going to take it. I'm kind of assuming we're going to stick with that death style a bit. We'll probably see it through a majority of the album. But if we get more sections like the back half of this one, I will be down for that. Now I mentioned that the vocals are kind of playing over something that I attribute to Gazey or Gaze adjacent, and I don't know that I would specifically call this a gaze adjacent genre. I'm curious, what does Rate Your Music have this listed as? Progressive metal primarily, with gothic metal and death doom as secondary genres. Yeah, nothing gaze related, but there's something very My Bloody Valentine about the end of this. I don't know, maybe it's just me, maybe it's just that section, maybe it's something we never really revisit. But I think it's just the super distorted, very fuzzy guitars, the compression that's on this entire track. I mean, there's just a production to it all that feel. Oh, it also came out in '07. And see, I gotta readjust. I gotta readjust a little bit for that too, because '07 was a time that, at least for me, I associate a lot of really. I don't know, not gnarly. I don't really want to say compressed again, but I suppose that's the proper term here. Just very compressed production. Everything was sort of in your face, very loud. Um, it really wasn't an era I associate too much, especially in the realms of rock and metal, with spacious, open, high fidelity production. Everything here is sort of cramped and aggressive and compressed down. And so when we mix that up with the fuzz on the guitars, I kind of get a gazy thing going on, but maybe it's just more of a 2000s thing going on. It does tie a little bit into the atmosphere of the whole thing, though. The chords throughout this represent a bit of a moodiness, not necessarily a melancholy through all of it, but definitely a somber haze. And I think part of that is me interpreting, again, the fuzz in the sound, but it's very much down tempo. The emotional resonance is a bit on the downer side. We're not anywhere near positive or bouncy or any of those phrases. But I wouldn't say that this was particularly a sad song either. Neutral Midas, I think, is where I'd put the emotional resonance. And I think that's really about all I have to add here. It's a very interesting. Oh, yeah, and then, like, the solo at the end. That they're like 10 seconds. There's 10 seconds in the song. What should we do? And someone's like, oh, let's just wrap it up. Let's have a nice fade out or something and just bring the song down. And the guitarist is like, I want a solo. And they're like, you got 10 seconds. He's like, I only need 5. And we're just going to end it abruptly. I don't know if that's how it actually went down, but it's just such a strange way to end the track, to increase the intensity of a song that just has this nice pace throughout. It's not really fast, it's not slow, it's taking its time for sure, but it's just a nice walk through the park. We're not speed walking, there's no brisk pace, but we're not walking lackadaisically either. It's neutral. And then at the end, it's like some shred, and then just an abrupt stop, like we ran into a wall. And this is just a very weird introduction to an album. It leaves me with so many questions, which I suppose is good. I'm very interested to get to the next track in a very different way than usually when I'm overly excited about a sound and I just want more of it. I just want answers right now. I'm gonna hit some lyrics. We'll see what's going on there, and then we'll progress forward and see what they do with this sound. The lyrics are something. I did notice that they're an Italian band, but this is their 6th album, and I believe they've been using English this, for all of them, if I read that correctly. So I don't know how much I really want to say is what's lost in translation or what is it, it's just due to it being a second language, but there is a stiltedness to the lyrics that feels, it's a very rigid idea. And I think part of it is the free poetry being used. There really isn't a consistent rhythm or even a rhyme scheme throughout most of this. It sort of just is. And I think that also ties into a little bit feeling the rigidity of the poetry of it all. But our opening line, it says, a certain feeling assails, visions form to wonder why. It still keeps fading away to the stars. It's an interesting way to write. And we see a lot of this throughout. Now, to me, a lot of this is cryptic, though. It's very minimal on description, focusing more on feeling and vibe. I think there's certainly a loneliness to these lyrics. There's a darkness, not like an evil or anything like that. It's just they're gloomy. They present an image of like sitting out on the bottom step of a staircase in pouring rain, dark skies overhead, lightning flashing in the background, like that kind of idea. That's sort of what this feels like. It just has that weight and gloom about it. Even if I don't necessarily understand everything that's being said, that image is being presented through the words. But it mentions that the sanitarium is the night of the mind. That's a really weird phrase because I've tried my best to figure out what that means. it mentions the sanitarium, which makes it feel like a specific one rather than the concept of one. But they call it the night of the mind, which makes it feel like the sanitarium is in the mind. I don't know, it's just a really strange metaphor that I have such a hard time wrapping my mind around, but it's brought up twice. Later on, it says that the sanitarium holds the keys of the night. So it holds the keys of the night, and it is the night of the mind. It says it's hidden where no one wants to know, as night side keeps saving your life with its silver painted dawn. But we dance for staying alive, and we're not alone. On and on the rains with their anemic crystals wash the pitch away, and I follow you through centuries of famine, and there will still be horror. Nightblood anemia, night and blood anemia. As black sprites keep draining your life when at night you're all alone, and dance to remain alive as the night beholds no dawn. I don't know. It's a feeling, it's a vibe. But I have such a tough time understanding this. It almost feels as if somebody's trapped inside their mind, fighting all the black sprites that drain their life. I mean, this could represent a lot of things, but they wake up in the morning, so we dance. We dance because we stayed alive another night. And it continues on. It says, I will follow you through centuries of famine, and there will still be horror. Like, there's still going to be bad days on the next side. Today was bad. Tomorrow is going to be bad. The next day is going to be bad. There's going to be, not every day is going to be great. And seemingly, there's going to be a lot of these bad days. But we'll dance together in order to keep us alive. That's sort of the vibe I get. Is that someone's having a rough bit of it, and this person's sticking by their side through thick and thin. I don't know if that's necessarily what they're going for here, because that feels a bit more positive than the gloomy vibe I get from most of this and from the music, but maybe that juxtaposition is supposed to be there. I don't know. What I do know is we're going to push forward. We're going to find out what's on the other side of this track with a song title I can't pronounce. I think that's the only one today. Let's dive into it, see what's going on with track number 2. Interesting hiccup at the beginning of this phrase. I'm not sure if we came in half a beat late or if it was like an odd meter. Very cool way of using this little riff to pull us into this next section. It's a little busy for the production. I think the idea is solid. I think the execution is just a little too compressed. Yeah, so they're just starting that idea on the and of one rather than the downbeat of one. I know we still have 10 tracks ahead of us. There's still pretty much an hour's worth of music to go. But I already know this is an album that I'm gonna need a second listen for. I think I might come around to what they're doing somewhere in the back half of the album, but by then I'll have had such a tough time, maybe frustrating time with the album, that once I get a feel for their style and I know what they're bringing to their work and how to approach it both casually and actively on a more critical level, it'll be too late for me to really have a a good understanding of the music to have a really strong positive response to it. And so I'm going to try my best to stay in a more positive headspace as we explore this until that point where it clicks for me, because right now it just feels so odd. And that's a good thing, right? I mean, this is progressive metal, and there's something really weird about the idea of progressive metal hitting your expectations. Progressive metal that is comfortable to listen to. Progressive metal that fits a mold. Like, the terms kind of go against each other. And so when I'm presented with this music that certainly I'd say fits under the progressive metal banner really well, it goes against a lot of my notions of what metal even is. There's so many very interesting combinations of sounds in here that continue to throw me off guard. And yes, that is what progressive music should be doing as on a whole. Progressive metal has kind of, I know there's a lot of really cool progressive metal out there doing their own things, but some of the more popular bands are all kind of doing the same thing, and it's not really progressive anymore. It's sort of just a genre to call your music. The progressive element is a descriptor of a type of music, not a descriptor of what you're doing with the metal. And so when I get to something like this and it's just monkey wrench after monkey wrench. I have no idea what to expect. I have no idea what's going on, and every moment I'm listening to this, I'm like, how? Why are they doing this? Um, it's just a very strange thing for me to listen to, and it's going to take some time to click with it, to connect with it. So it's very strange in a good way because it's actually doing something progressive to my ears, at least. But I did want to put that little disclaimer out there because I still don't know what they're doing. And it's just so bizarre. And I think you're gonna find that I end up chuckling through a lot of these tracks because I have no idea when the novelty of moving from growls and aggressive guitar riffs to pop rock style drum beats and sort of semi-optimistic vocal harmonies, that shift is just so bizarre to me. It's the biggest change of uh, emotional resonance of feeling of vibe that it feels so bizarre. And my reaction is it's just it's comedy, I guess. It makes me laugh. And so, like I said, it's gonna take time, I think, for me to get used to this, to click with it. And by then I fear it's gonna be pretty late into the reaction. So here's the other weird thing though, is that I'm not gonna say much in here is interesting. I wanted to use a different word, but I'm not too engaged with what's going on in most of this. The metal riffs are good. The harshes on top of them are good. The drumming behind it is good, but it all feels flat to me for some reason. I don't know if I'm getting jaded to more heavy metal or early. Would this? That's not even early death metal. The riffs in this one specifically feel more heavy metal to me. Um, I don't know if I'm just getting jaded to that kind of simpler. Well, see, okay, so here's the thing, right? This is only some parts of it. I will say the majority of this track and the last had more simplistic riffage to it, but that's not all they write. So, like, parts of this song, I feel I'm just having such a large disconnect with. They're not really clicking with me emotionally. I do like the harmonic structure in some of this. I like their exploration of chord progressions, but their riffs themselves, they're just fine. They're serviceable. They do the job. I'm not going to say that there's anything negative about them. I'm really not clicking with them. And the harshes, again, they sort of just exist. They help push the song in a direction, provide some contrast, but I'm not really engaging with them much either. The bass is still fairly non-existent, which now that I know it's an '07 track, I mean that kind of makes sense. I do still really like the poppier bits, that gloomy pop sound where we get the vocal harmonies with sort of the more melodic guitar work. I find those sections are my favorite, even if I still don't find I'm connecting too much with them. Again, on a first time listen, I still think this is something that it takes a spin, maybe two spins, to really engage with it. To kind of become familiar with what they're doing to a point where you can begin to understand beyond the surface level. Some albums, I click with them immediately and I just have fantastic reads on a first listen. Others, my read isn't so strong on a first time around and it takes a couple, and I think this is going to be one of those. I've said it before, my favorite album, one of my favorite albums of all time, easily in my top three. I hated the first time I heard it. It sat on my shelf for years, and I came back to it and I just fell in love with it. Uh, and this could be one of those moments. I don't hate this. It's just fine, you know. But then they do some really cool stuff that pulls me back in. I want to turn this around a little bit and put a more positive spin on this. The structure in this track is sort of linear. We do end up returning to some ideas in the back half, but for the first 3 or so minutes of this 5-minute track, it's just new section after new section. And after we get done with what felt like maybe the chorus to the track, we had this little guitar line that kind of eased us out of it. It felt like we were going to move into a new direction. And we got this neat little ornamental guitar idea at the end of the phrase. Uh, Lots of hammer-ons and pull-offs. It's just a very legato 16th note. Dun 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 dun. Those really fast, flowery little ideas. And interesting, like a broken record, we got stuck on it though. It ended the phrase the first time, but the second time the phrase came around, we hit it, and then we hit it again, and then we hit it again, and we started making a riff out of this ornamental concept, out of this punctuation at the end of a phrase. It became the phrase, and then we had another one stacked on top of it. And then after a few bars, we had the vocals come in, and then a third one, and it was a very busy section. I will say that ideas like that need space, and this is one example where I would love a modern remix of this with a larger sound sphere. Just really open it up, allow these instruments the space they need to be heard, because it does get a bit muddy and it just becomes this wall of sound where I think that the intricacies of this uh, counterpoint is really cool to explore. You just can't really hear it in this version of the track, this recording of it. Um, so that's more of it's a beautiful idea on paper. The execution just wasn't so great. Still a bit of a positive idea, but the transition was gorgeous. We went from the chorus and we took like one of the last couple of notes and allowed it to move us into this guitar interlude. And then we used one of the ideas in this guitar interlude and retooled it to become a new riff. And just this really smooth transition between ideas is phenomenal. I really enjoyed this moment, and I think that this is something that I forgot to talk about in the first track, but they also showcased there as well. It's just the smoothness of movement between ideas. I think they're really good at that. Um, and this was a big highlight for me. And the next section too, I think worked really well with these tones and everything. So they knew that they needed to shift away from their aggressive guitar work and pull in maybe a less aggressive but still electric, still distorted guitar tone in order to move into this next section with the clean vocals on top of all these ornamental counterpoints going on. They're just really in tune with fluidity. They know where they're at, where they want to go, And they know that they don't just want to smash the two ideas together, so they create these little moments in between that are all about recontextualization and evolution. This was what we were playing. Well, we can still use half of it and modify the other half, so we'll start with the same idea but have a different ending to it, and then that ending can take us to another section. And it's just really smart writing. And so far, I think that's been the highlight of the album for me, is just their transitions are phenomenal. Well, oh man, the vocal harmonies are another highlight. Oh, this one also had layered harshes against cleans, which was very cool. Um, I don't know if it's because they were using fry screams rather than growls, but the way that the clean vocals and harsh vocals, the way that their textures lined up was just gorgeous. I love the way, I mean, it might be also just that they're the same person, maybe. I don't know. Do they have a different growler? I suppose I'll do that when I look up the lyrics, is pull up a personnel list and see what's going on with the vocal work. Anyways, it sounds phenomenal. I mean, that's those three things are what's keeping me going forward at this moment. I'm gonna hit the lyrics for this one, and then we'll continue on. All right, real quick on a personnel level. It's pretty cool. Looks like these people are related. The guitarist and drummer, the vocalist and drummer, they both have the same last name. There's a second guitarist, a bassist, and track 6 will have some guest vocals on it. But otherwise, it looks like all the vocal work is done by the lead vocalist. So, lyrics. This one made no sense to me. It's even more vague than the last. It wasn't until I read the annotation that it is about a city in Italy that was only became a city in 1954, so it's a rather recent event. There was some dispute about whether it belonged to Italy, Germany, or Yugoslavia, and it recently fell under Italian ownership. That's the word I'm looking for. Uh, interesting. The title comes from a sign that the vocalist saw in a documentary on the topic. It says, musically speaking, this is one of the hardest hitting songs on the album. I didn't think it was that heavy. So I guess it's all downhill from here as far as intensity goes. But the song seems to be about division and some sort of person who feels connected to this in some way. Originally, it speaks about more abstract ideas. It says, at the border, there's cold and rigid guardians. We run in circles till the world stops spinning, till we remain breathless, overwhelmed by laughter. Starry skies of stains, ultimately sorry, uneducated random strokes of pain. It's a chain going backwards through the veins, must sew up this wound and run away. I don't know. It says, I can feel their strength, crooked lightning desert pathways, run and run and run, the pathways branching off through time. Two lone wolves shared the utmost silence of the time. Run the pathways as you share the utmost of silence. I don't know. I mean, it talks about parallel movement in silence, two people on similar paths who don't engage with each other. There's moments of beauty, the starry skies, but it calls them skies of stains. and then the uneducated random strokes of pain. Again, it's just a very interesting phrase. In fact, it kind of feels like something lost in translation. See, another word for uneducated is stupid, and at least in American English, we will kind of use that as a description. A stupid, stupid pain, stupid stroke of pain. That feels very natural. Uneducated random strokes of pain, I think, really leans heavily into the lack of education, the stupidity of it, rather than just more of the colloquial use of stupid, in that it's not that the pain itself is dumb. It's the event that led to it was dumb. Like I don't know. I don't know how to explain that. That's why I'm not a linguist. But that line right there sort of tells me it was translated in an odd way instead of something that was specifically chosen. Because an uneducated stroke of pain doesn't make any sense to me, unless it's just more metaphor that just goes over my head. I don't know. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, we're 2 for 2 with songs that are emotionally vague for me and lyrically vague. So at the end of the day, well, at the end of these 2 tracks at least, there are similarities between the musical themes and lyrical themes, at least with my experience relating to them. There is a negativity that is met in both the music and lyrics that I can feel is palpable, even if I don't have such a strong connection and understanding of what's happening on a deeper level. So I guess on some level, their execution of this stuff is really well done. I'm going to push forward with Cobalt of March, which I think is our first track that refers to the color blue. Let's dive into this one and see what's going on. Really interesting chord on the guitar. See, I really like this layering too. The rhythmic juxtaposition between the 2 guitar lines is really nice, and the melody on top is beautiful. Keeping the acoustic guitar in the middle there is a really great decision. It's kind of grungy in some ways, too. It's a really great moment right here. Really interesting. The vocals, that guitar tone that was being held out, the vocals clashed against it, created some dissonance, and then slid into harmony with it. Really playing around with offbeats there. Getting some less technical Neobliviscaris vibes in that last section. A very cool idea. Tell me if I'm wrong here. And maybe this isn't on other works of theirs. It feels like they don't know how to end a track. They're so good at transitioning between ideas that when they need to transition to silence, it's like they don't know what to do. This is the second time that we've introduced a brand new idea that I felt was worth exploring as an outro. And I find it very strange to do that because even thinking about the guitar solo at the end of Anaemia, the idea right here, both of them feel like there's more to it. They feel like they're moving towards something and they're used as outros instead, and it feels very backwards to me. I think the last track was had a much better sense of finality to its ending, where we actually utilized an idea to present the end of the sound. But I suppose that that's actually a good problem to have. I mean, basically, I'm saying that as I'm listening to this, I want more. They're doing something right because I want more of what they're doing. So it's just, I don't know. We'll see how they work with endings on the rest of the album. I think that's something I kind of want to pay attention to and see how they work around that. But so far, it really feels like they just want, or actually, maybe they should write an album where every track moves into the next. Then they only have to worry about ending one song. Um, Like I said, we'll see how the rest of the album deals with that. But so far, I haven't wanted the tracks to end much. I wanted to hear the solo at the end of Anemia. I wanted to hear where that harmonic echo thing, echo guitar riff went on Cobalt to March. I want to hear more of their ideas. I feel like they're all stopped too early, too soon. This track really worked with me though, overall. Uh, I don't know if it's because I've kind of went through some grievances and it's allowed me to perceive the better parts of the track. Maybe the last 40 minutes of talking about this stuff has given me the perspective I've needed to really appreciate it. But this track really worked. The atmosphere, it's still there. Here's something I haven't really talked about. The atmosphere is very rooted, very grounded. There's nothing in here that I think really soars or bounces or feels like there's any levity to. Even that bouncing harmonic delayed guitar riff we had there at the end, which has a pluckiness to it, still felt very chained to the ground. There's a weight to everything on the album so far that I think works really well in their favor. And we continue on with a bit more of the gloomier sounds. I kind of want to focus on this for a second too, is that their harmonic ideas, the chords that they use, the progressions they utilize, the intervals in their melody that they use on top of the chords, everything in here is kind of unique for metal. I don't know that I've heard a lot of this with such a focus before in the realm of metal. But, well, do I need that qualifier? Maybe not. I'm not going to say that they're inventing brand new chord progressions here. I'm pretty sure they've all been plotted out. We've been making music for so long with the Western idea of scales and tones that I mean, most of it has been done before. um, but it is refreshing. It's stuff I don't hear very often. And, that's a double-edged sword too. It means that I don't have anything immediately to lean on and say, oh, this is what they're saying because I've heard other bands, other songs utilize these same progressions with these ideas. And, I've created patterns over the years listening to these sounds. And this is fairly fresh to me. There is still a moodiness, a sorrow, a gloom that's kind of present everywhere, but it's not the only feeling. And this is something I've been trying to figure out is a bit of the ambiguity of emotion throughout this. I've mentioned pop music multiple times this reaction already, and I still feel that that's accurate. Much like much like some pop ballads out there, you can feel that they're supposed to be heavier due to a tempo change. Maybe there's a higher emphasis use of minor keys, minor chords throughout that kind of create more of a sorrowful element, but they might still have a catchy rhythm to the vocal work. Maybe the lead melody is a bit on the more major side, and the clash is what gives it a bit of its bite. Um, but there's, maybe if you've heard, it's hard to talk about. If you've heard one of these pop ballads that are sad but still quite pop music, that's kind of what I'm getting at here. There is certainly a gloomy haze over all these tracks, but many of them push forward with an energy and harmonically have a bit of a brightness in it that I don't want to call bittersweet. I don't think that that's the right word for it. I don't want to say that it's a ray of hope amongst the sorrow. I don't think that's an accurate fitting of this emotion either. It's a bit more complex than that, and I don't have enough experience with it to really nail down what I'm feeling. But I do want to highlight that. I don't have an answer for what they're doing or what they're achieving with it, but they're playing around with chords and harmonies and just note intervals that are interesting to my ears that I don't get to hear too often. So I haven't had a strong read on the emotional quality, but it's not because of anything they're doing in a negative. It's actually a positive. They're exploring sounds I don't have patterns to lean back on. And so I wanted to give them a little bit of praise for that. And they're not even sounds that I typically associate, once again, with prog metal. You know, prog metal likes to play with jazzy sounds, but it's always the same jazzy sounds. There are specific tones that, especially modern prog metal, like to play within and keys and modes. And this is just a fair bit outside of that realm. They're exploring stuff that, at least to me, is quite unique with the combination of these specific sounds and metal. And that kind of takes me to my next point. I remembered that I was described this album as being metal. Prog metal, goth metal, doom, a little bit of death, all of it metal though. And I think what's really interesting is I don't hear a lot of metal here. Sure, we have more metallic guitar riffs every once in a while. We have the harsh vocals, that's very metally. But honestly, I've mentioned pop emo a couple of times. This feels very rock to me. And I don't know if that's just because, like, my window for what is heavy enough to be metal is so skewed because of the wild, extreme stuff y'all have thrown at me. I know that I have a tough time hearing some, well, like Dream Theater. I kind of have a hard time putting them in the prog metal camp just because they're so tame compared to some of the heights of metal. But they are, and I try to remember that it's about like guitar tone, not about pure weight. And in this track specifically, there's plenty of sections where I think the guitar tone was metallic, but there's still a lot of rock influence in here as well. And I'm really surprised that the word rock or a rock adjacent genre doesn't come up at all in the way that they get described, because this is very tame for metal in a majority of the sounds. And I think that's something that's really working for me, and maybe what's creating another layer of juxtaposition that I find a bit jarring. Usually when bands are progressive, they're still progressive within their style. Um, or if they have multiple styles, they stick within them. But rock and metal, I feel just there's no crossover there. You either have heavier metal work or you have heavier, or you have a rock sound, and you don't really cross over between the two. And so I find this really fascinating because they do dip down into ballads, rock ballads at times, and they do dip into death metal sections for sure. When we bring the drums and guitars and harsh vocals together, that's straight up death metal. And there's just, at least to me, this large chasm between those two sides that it's almost absurd at times. But I think I'm getting used to it. I think those gaps they're becoming more palatable to me. Something about this track specifically that I think works really well for me is sort of a singularity of vision. A lot of the sections in the album as a whole so far have felt very similar. They're all very atmospherically driven. Occasionally they'll have a melodic line to them. And then you have the vocals on top of the atmosphere. And this one kind of allows the guitars to have a bit more melodic work going on in them. And I think part of that is the inclusion of the classical guitar even after we added in the distorted guitar. Sorry, the acoustic guitar, even after we add the electric ones. And it kind of retains this beautiful melodic element to it, rather than just being the chords or the riffs that the guitars are playing. We do have this extra element there. And so it added a component that I think I needed. I had mentioned that everything was sort of okay after the first track, that it wasn't blowing me away, but I wasn't upset. There was nothing wrong with it. It's very well done. And I think this was the one missing piece. I just want an extra melodic component to it all. I don't know. We'll see how they move going forward. But this track really clicked, and I think it's just that one little thing. We also had plenty of back and forth on the vocals, which I thought was really nice. Going back to the idea of singular focus, though, the track also just feels like one idea. I don't know what the structure was on this one. I could divvy out, this was where we had our old riff and we introduced a new riff, and this is where we introduced the harsh vocals, and this is where we went back to the cleans and stuff like that. But I mean, musically, it just feels like one 6-minute section. That's how I remember it, emotionally. And I think it worked like that. It didn't grow stagnant, which I think is interesting. I think it's those micro changes. Changing a riff here and there, adding in harsh vocals, layering both vocals, and then doing cleans only. Um, they keep it fresh from moment to moment without really changing it up in any large way, like we saw in the last two tracks that had very divided sections. And so it felt like an overall moment explored sonically, which I think just works really well with this type of music. I mean, it is at its heart somewhere very doomy. There's a weight put on, and it's about just enveloping yourself in this emotion. And I think it's the moments when they try to move away from that, ironically, as much as I enjoy their transitions, that feel the most jarring to me is when they have these very wide changes of style. And I think this one being a bit more homogenous really worked for me. It allowed them to focus on what they do well and not do anything that distracts me. And that's a very subjective thing. I don't think everybody who listens to this is going to get pulled out of the album every time that they do a massive genre swap. But at least for me, it is something that it's a hurdle for me to overcome. And this one didn't have it. I think that's why I found it a bit more easier to listen to. Lyric time. Song appears to be about somebody coming back from the dead, possibly. At one point says, I fade away into September. My soul is going to return, and it will be just for one more time to say that nothing truly dies. But while they're here in this moment, they primarily speak about this other person. Their eyes, the arch of their smile, seeing their eyes lost in the days of the nighttime dark. Says that I see this numb morning dies. Morning as in sorrow, crying, not daytime. I see this orchid was born to be taken away. There's a lot of this concept that life ends. At one point, even says, I see that life was just meant to be taken away, that there's going to be sorrow and heartbreak because everyone dies. Mourning is a part of the human experience. And it's possible that he's looking at a loved one, someone he knew, that knew him. And it's kind of reflecting on the experiences of life and sort of the remembrance of life. This person, it seems, it says that their eyes are lost in the days of the nighttime dark, but that their eyes are above the arch of a smile. There seems to be about a level of remembrance to this. A remembrance of life lived. Uh, the bittersweetness of remembering our loved ones that have passed. The sorrow of knowing they're gone, but the good memories as well. The time you spent with them. That's what this song seems like to me. And once again, it has a bit of a very melancholic element to it. It fits well with the music. I'm pretty sure that's going to be a consistent theme throughout these lyrical breakdowns, is that the gloominess of the music is going to be met with some gloomy lyrics or some gloomy lyrical themes. I don't know if I need to keep bringing it up. I suppose just how this is gonna be. Alright, we're gonna push forward with the next one, our second track with the title of Blue. This one outright calling itself Bluecracy. Let's dive into it, see what's going on. Yeah, I suppose not very metal sounds. Another very cool transition. Oh, we got some bass highlight here. I finally get to hear the pure bass. So this feels very rock to me. Ooh, whoa, what? Yeah, nice retardando into that last section and an accelerando out of it back to here. Yeah, really great transition into this more driving rendition of this section. Okay. I mean, I'll concede. That was a good little ending idea. Still kind of comes out of nowhere. I always feel like they just want to wedge these little 10-second ideas in. It's like they wrote a riff and don't know where to put it, and instead of just leaving it on the cutting room floor, they shove it in as the endings. Like I said, I think this one worked a lot better than Cobalt and Anemia, but it's still a bit jarring. I think it would have worked better if they had just taken what they were already working on with the full band with the electric guitars and maybe crossfaded that into a clean acoustic guitar if they wanted to keep that acoustic side for the ending there. Just take that same musical idea and change the timbre of it. But I think even just kind of hitting the final note of that phrase they had and then just allowing it to fade out naturally, I think would have been just fine. In a, like, I don't know, in a way, it almost feels like they're trying to do too much, and that's usually not a criticism I have. But it does feel a bit too maximal, in a way that impedes the greatness of the album, the greatness of the sound. All right, meter and time in general. This is something I haven't really talked about much yet at all. All of their songs seem to be in 4/4 with general 4-bar phrasing, occasionally leaning into triplet vibes. There are a couple of times that I've counted sections in 3. I don't know if that's what they would, if that's how they view them, because they work just fine in 4 as well usually. The 3 is usually a like a triplet feel against a 4, but it's the dominant feel to me, so that's what I end up counting it as. They're not really being too playful with meter, with time signatures, but they do get playful with time. I think it was the second track that had the second half of the chorus starting on the and of one. I don't know if you guys remember bringing that up. The second time I counted it out, it's just 16 bars, 32 bars. I think it was 32, or sorry, 32 beats, an 8-bar phrase in 4/4. And on bar 5, instead of coming in on the downbeat like we do the first time around in bar 1, we come in on the and of one. And a lot of the following ideas are all on off beats. And it makes it feel like we actually lost a beat somewhere. And their emphasized notes are the new downbeat, but they're not. If you count it out and just stick with your guns and just count out all the downbeats, which are going to be opposite of how they're emphasizing it, it lines back up. It does. And we saw a little bit of this in Cobalt of March too, where they like to play with offbeat hits, which I think is really interesting for their overall vibe. Offbeat hits tend to have a dexterity, a bounciness to them. They go against the beat, they create syncopation. These are the opposite of what you would want for weighty sounds. If you listen to traditional doom metal or well, any sort of music really going for weight, you'll find there's not a lot of offbeat hits. If they are, they're utilized very sparingly. Post-metal would be another genre where you can check this out at. There's, that's not a rule. I'm sure you can find me a song or even a band that utilizes a lot of offbeat accents and still achieves a heavy sound. It's not something that's impossible to do. It's just that you're fighting against a current at that point. You're creating an element that opposes the vibe you're trying to create, and it gives you an extra level that you need to write within. And so I find it really interesting when they do this because it kind of lines up with that idea that I had about the harmonic area, where yes, the chord progressions and the intervals they're using certainly have a gloominess to them, but there's also this something else, this brightness, this sparkle, this glint of hope, I suppose. But it's none of that. It's a bit more complex, and I don't have a word for it, but there is something a little bit more positive in the darkness. And that's sort of what they're doing rhythmically, too. A lot of these songs are very downbeat heavy. Makes sense. They're trying to make something grounded, rooted, feels like it's in place, it's stable. Um, and every once in a while, they'll just play around with offbeat hits in a way that feels a little bouncy, feels a little playful. But it never quite removes the weight that they have going for them. And so, on a multifaceted level, they're introducing this levity in small doses in a way that allows them to, on multiple levels, make it so it's not as bleak as it feels like it could be. And I appreciate that. It's not, they realize that it's not just a harmonic aspect to this, it's everything that's going to give it this feeling. And so they try to find that levity in as many ways as possible. In fact, the vocal harmonies, while that's technically a harmonic device and would technically fit within the realm of the chords and the progressions, it's also a melodic device. And so we also find unity in that, which for a couple of these songs being about in isolation, I think it's interesting to deliver those lines with dual vocals. Our vocalist is not alone when they sing some of this stuff, and that's not something I'm going to pick up at this time around in this entire reaction here, but on a second listen, I might figure out how often he sings a line that alludes to loneliness with a second vocalist, and how often he doesn't, how often it is a lone vocal line, and kind of see if there's anything to be drawn from that. This song, though, in particularly, we played around with meter, well, time specifically, not with meter, but with tempo, and we had that really nice dip, a smooth retardando into a new tempo that was a bit slower, and at the end of it, an accelerando back to our original tempo. I think that's just really nice. It felt strange. It took me a second to get used to it. At first, I counted it into groupings of five, and I was like, there's no way they shifted to 5/4. It was still 4/4. It was a tempo change, not a time signature one. But, just a smooth transition, right? I know progressive metal tends to use a wider palette, but just tempo changes tend to be stepwise. We were at this speed, now we're at this speed. That's how a lot of metal handles it. It's just really nice to see a retardando and an accelerando in metal music. I thought it was also nice because I don't think any of the other tracks have really dealt with tempo changes at all. They've been fairly standard. The speed you start at is the speed you end at, and well, that's true here too. But we had the change in the middle, and so I appreciate that. Just another little detail. See, that's the thing too. Like when I focus on the details, I tend to walk away from these songs impressed, but when I focus on the larger picture, I feel like there's something missing. And again, I want to attribute that to me. I don't want to say that they've messed up, that they have really great ideas and they're just not coming together in a positive or in a better way. But my experience so far on this first time listen is that I tend to enjoy the smaller, finer details more so than the larger ones. The trees are more interesting than the forest itself in this case. And I do think that'll change because as the album goes on, I find myself enjoying more and more sections. In fact, the entire opening verse of this track I loved because it felt very much like Nowhere Kids from Smile Empty Soul, which is like a really weird direction to go in, but like there is kind of a post grunginess to some of their more mellow sections with their vocals on them. And I think as a vocalist, he would make a fantastic post grunge vocalist. He has the voice for it. Um, but yeah, like the vibes were totally different. Like there's nothing really that matches those two songs. It was just sort of a feeling. The atmosphere is different, the layering was different, the vocals were kind of similar, but I don't know. I really like that. I wish we had returned to something like it, but there's still a lot more music ahead of us, so I'm sure we will return to something similar to it. But it did make me really appreciate some of the more down tempo, uh, less layered, just chill, clean vocal sections. I'd like to hear more of that. Lyrically, on first read, I had no idea what to think about this. There's some threads going on here. It seems somebody is locked away somewhere. There's a lot of ideas of blue and sapphire, just overall concepts of coldness, I'd say. Oh, actually, there's a lot more because there's ice and endless columns. And I thought there was another one too about snow. Oh, there was rain. Anyways, it's just a very cold song lyrically. But it starts off says, I can't see where you are and I can't stay in the sun. The idea, once again, I can't find warmth. I can't stay in the sun. Um, and I'm blind to whatever you are. I can't see it. And then there's some confusion. There's a slow parade, which I think is metaphorical. It says a slow parade of massive figures and clouds. We move on to, I think, the strangest line here. It feels quite out of place against everything else, but makes sense in a bit. It says, I'm going to kill you, for you have slain my child and enchained me in this maze. By the end of it, says that he's still blind, but drags his bones onward. There's rescue under the rain. A chance to pray. The horror is through the air, much too dark here. Pull back the curtains and let the sun in. It sort of tells a whole story here. We have a feeling of being lost that's followed up by a desire for revenge, leading into a more nostalgic tone for a life once lived, presumably with his child that's been murdered. A bleak outlook is left next, followed by a possible moment of clarity. It's too dark here, pull the curtains back. And it almost feels like this person is going through the grief of a loss of their child, trying to explore life, not really understanding it anymore, and anger, wanting revenge, remembrance of a time that once was, and then kind of wanting it all to end, bringing in a little bit of that bleak outlook before coming to the acceptance and realizing this is not healthy. I gotta fix this. I gotta let the sun in. I gotta find warmth again. And all of this negativity that's been pervading the song here at the end, he's like, we need to get rid of that. We need to bring some warmth and light back in here. We need to get rid of the blues. And I think it's interesting because the song does end on that acoustic guitar line there. That does feel a bit more optimistic than the rest of the track's weight and gloom. And I guess I came around to that ending. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it's not as tacked on as I thought it was. Mentioning the color blue here, though, I haven't really brought this up yet because I feel it's a bit too on the nose given the album cover and the album title, The Blue. A lot of this album does feel devoid of warmth, though. Not entirely. The guitars, I think it's the way that I associate electric guitars, especially distorted metal guitars. They're very aggressive. They have a lot of bite to them. They have a lot of energy to them. In a sense, I view electric guitars as having a lot of life. A lot of blood flows through them, and when blood flows through a body, it gains its color. When your blood doesn't pump anymore, that's when you begin to turn blue and purple and stuff. It's what gives the body a little bit of the hue. So electric guitars have always been more of a neutral, warm sound to me. I find it really difficult to kind of picture them in blue. But I will say that some of the more acoustic lines, not necessarily the timbres of the acoustic guitars, but the lines that are there, some of the vocal patterns and the atmospheres, the harmonic side of things, again, not dealing with the instrument itself, do feel gloomy and bleak. And I do associate bluishness with it, but more of like a black and white haze. So I understand where they're coming from with blue. I don't know if they specifically went out of their way to create a blue tone, or if maybe this is what they've played and they're like, hey, this sounds kind of blue, and they just decide to make an album really leaning into it or something. But I could understand how people could describe this sound as blue, but to me it's vaguely blue. Blue is an accent color within it, which I find really interesting because when I would think of melancholy, blue would probably be the color I think of. And it's just not the color I'm associating with this track, despite the gloominess about it. I think the gloom is really tinting it. It's not a melancholic album so far, at least in my eyes. It's a gloomy one. And has a very different visual I associate with it. But I love the album art. I love the hues and shades that they have going on with that. I think it's a really great decision. Even the blacks are bluish. Let me pull this up real quick, since we're moving forward anyways. It's just a real, even the white of, the primary finger to the fingertip, some parts of the face, it's a bluish white. It's just a really great use of color on the album art itself. All right, let's push forward. Track number 5. We might run this into 6 unless I have something interesting to talk about it specifically. Let's keep going. Okay, that worked better than I thought. I thought we were going to do a full transition out of this intro after just 15 seconds. Got a real Midwest vibe with those higher bit guitar tones. Their transitions though, right? They're so good. Yeah, see, this section doesn't feel blue to me at all. I love how it feels like he's aiming for pitches with his harshes. Another idea I'd love to explore. We're just not going to get to. It's a very long fade out though. They got 5 seconds of silence at the end of every track, and that fade out was like 15. It's almost half a minute. Oh yeah, this is the track with the guest vocals on it. There's another one of those sections where we move to a 3. But it also a triplet against the 4. That's very fast 3. That's a really nice bridge in the middle there. I mean, it did what a bridge does and divides up the song, creates some contrast. I enjoyed that. Track 5, I think, was the heaviest so far. I'm kind of glad that whatever I read was wrong, that track 2 would have been the heaviest, because I do feel like the album needs a little bit of contrast. Personally, I mean, this is a subjective element here, but some of these songs do blur together in a way that if they all blur together, it's going to make the album forgettable for me. Or I should say, it's not going to make it forgettable, it just isn't going to be memorable. And I think it really needs those moments of contrast to help create the bit of division there. And I think it adds into some of the elements that they're writing about as well. While I do think that their gloominess has a weight to it, I don't feel like it is very particularly suited towards creating heavy feelings. It creates a gloom, it creates a weight, but it is not the sort of oppressive sound that I think the album goes for sometimes. And so when we bring in the metal aspects, that's where it really gets, where it really brings that weight, where it really brings that impact to the shoulders kind of feeling. And so mixing them together, you can get that gloomy atmosphere and that overbearing weight combined. It really is a product of the two sides more so than one or the other. And balancing the two, I think, is really key to this album as a whole. Both the casual enjoyment of it and really selling the emotions that they're going for. And so, like I said, I'm glad that track 5 had some of that extra weight in it. Even if it was more predominantly geared towards the heavier side, it balanced out some of the lighter stuff we had heard on the track before it. I don't know that I have much to add to either of these tracks past that observation, though. I did like the additional vocal work here, but I don't feel that her timbre was really too different from his, at least the way it's produced. And the fact that something I haven't really talked about much is that the clean vocals are hidden in the mix a bit. When you compare them to the harsh vocals, you'll find that the harshes are very present above or in front of the guitar work, whereas the cleans tend to, in the electric guitar sections, get buried a bit by it. They find space to cut through in range, but as far as volume wise, I feel like they're a bit low for the album. And so when you kind of mix both of theirs together, kind of getting pushed into the mix a fair bit, it really isn't that different. I don't know that I would have known that was a second vocalist if I hadn't had read about the fact that she was present on this track. Especially since much of the vocal work was the two of them doing harmony. We really never got her isolated to really hear some more of the nuances of her timbre. So it's a lot of the same writing we've been hearing in ranges that are similar and in timbres that are similar. I don't know that I would have put that together. I would have been very surprised, I think, to have found out later, oh, that was another vocalist there, um, which isn't a bad thing. I'm just not sure I see the purpose of it. Maybe when we get into the lyrics, it makes a bit more sense to have a actual second vocalist there. Because most of these tracks so far have either been larger abstracted concepts or stories about singular people. Maybe it brings in a second person to the thing and they wanted a second vocalist to be present for that. I don't know. Um, but yeah, these two tracks continue to lean into what they do very well, which is ambiance, gloom, weight, um, and just really great layered writing. I mean, I wrote this down because I wanted to make sure to bring it back up. I feel like I get fixated on the negative stuff unless I write the positive stuff down as notes to return to later. Acoustic guitar under the metal. Every time it comes up, it is so well done. The transitions continue to be excellent. It's just, they're really solid at doing what they do and at the elements that I think they excel at. I really dig it. There is one thing that kind of the elephant in the room. I'm sure some people might be a bit upset that I haven't brought it up yet. And honestly, I don't know how it slipped my mind so often. I want to take a moment right here at the midpoint of the album to shine a little spotlight over on the drummer. I've only brought the drums up once. I think it was after the first track when I mentioned that the drumming was fine. And I still think the opening track is not a great showcase of very much at all. It's the weirdest opening now that I have a feeling for the bands. I'm beginning to enjoy some of their works more and getting a feel for what they're doing. At first track just is not a great showcase. Maybe it makes sense to them thematically to explore that song first on the album, but to me it really feels like something you want to stuff into the middle of the back half, kind of sneak it in there and have it surrounded by some great stuff in the middle and your exceptional finale. Just kind of sneak it in there somewhere if you really feel like you need to add it. And I don't think it's a bad song. It's just not a great way to be introduced to the band or to this album. It feels a bit too segmented and it doesn't quite know what it's doing. And the ending is just everything about it was strange to me. And actually, I suppose I don't know if it was strange because I didn't know what I was getting into yet, or if it's actually because it was a bit of a strange song. I suppose revisiting it any point after now where I have a stronger grasp on what the band is doing, but particularly when I'm done with the album, I might revisit it off camera and see how I feel about it. Maybe on camera. I guess we'll see how long. Geez, we're at 2 hours already. We still have half an album to go. Wow, Bryan here. We're really stretching this one out. Um, I'll check it out again and see how I feel about it. It might have just been a combination of a lot of stuff, and maybe it's not as odd as I thought. Anyways, I meant to be talking about the drums here. Having spent more time listening to what the drummer is doing, I find that I appreciate their contributions a lot. For a majority of the time, they are sitting in the pocket, really holding down the tempo, just being a really solid drummer. But they have some fantastic, what do they call them? A drum riff, a fill. They have some fantastic fills. They utilize semi-melodic drumming to help in transitions across this album as well. And there are moments when he just kind of goes all out and does some bonker stuff that, I mean, honestly, really only works in progressive music because everything else around it can be just as bonkers and it doesn't feel out of place. I don't remember if it was this track or track 5, somewhere near the beginning, just kind of randomly goes into this massive, like, 2 bar hitting all sorts of stuff. Constant, I think it was constant 16th notes, just a beast on the drums, really showcasing his power, his skill, his power levels rising, showcasing his skill there. And I was like, yeah, I need to bring this up. I haven't talked about it yet, but the drummer has been both consistent and skilled and knows when to switch between the two modes very well. You can certainly tell he's a seasoned drummer, and is not in it for the spotlight. Mostly, like I said, most of the time, just really sitting in the pocket, sitting in a groove, laying down a really good drum line. But when the time arises, he's got chops. And I think that's awesome. He knows when those moments are, and more importantly, when those moments aren't. And so the songs end up being more about the song than any one instrument, including the drummer. And I think the band as a whole just has a really nice restraint to them, where they're all a lot more talented than the songs require, but they know what the songs require and doesn't go beyond that. Though, keeping in line with some of my other opinions, I do think they could have shown a little bit of restraint on the composition side. I still think they're not great with their outros. It's I don't know. Maybe it's something I get used to, but it's very consistent that a song ends and I'm like, "Oh, it's over?" I really wanted to explore that. Why is that something you just put on for a couple seconds? I think it's got, there's meat on it. Let's explore it. Let's hit some lyrics. All right. So, Architheme isn't a word. I was hoping I might get a little bit of extra knowledge, insight into this track's lyrics if I knew that word, and it's not a real word. Anyways, it says it flows out from inside, it builds cities and fairy tales reachable from here through a stairway of dust. Some sort of power from the inside that allows things to be created, creation power. Could even be the creative power for like artists, the creative process itself. It says, but it fails to restore the themes, the rhymes, the fresco half lights, and then it smears them with everlasting paint. There's something lost in the process. It's not quite perfect recreation. And then it goes to speak about filthless times. It says, spare me of your goddamn wonders and give us back the day. Reach out from the weight of the debris of the earth. It says, I stand under the vault and find just the meaning of the end as I finally walked the sorrowful way. I think there at the end they died. The sorrowful way, the meaning of the end, to me feels like death. Maybe not a physical one, though, maybe a metaphorical one, especially if we look at this through the power of creation. What does it mean to reach a point where you can't create anymore? I don't know. Maybe aligning with the ideas of gloom and blue, this could be writer's block brought by depression, brought by heartbreak. Speaking of heartbreak, we move into the next track, Nascence, which is a love song. Not necessarily through two people, though, which is what I alluded to earlier, why I thought they wanted to have a second vocalist here, but it is certainly a love song. I mean, the second stanza says, feeling the coolness of the ocean in your bright eyes, the taste of salty waves. Nascence and feel no discomfort while I slowly run my faint hand through the softness of your hair. Nothing will ever make this magic moment vanish throughout the streams of time into the fire that purifies the memories. This moment is going to be something I remember forever, even past death, even past the failure of the mind. And it speaks about finding a new life through this. It says, the last time you met me, I thought I was alive, but through earth, wind, and fire, I'm now coming to life. I really like that. This is a seemingly positive note against a series of songs that have dealt with negativity, depression, gloom, heavy weights, all of them lyrically. So I think it's interesting to put this pin in the middle of the album and say, we can get a bit positive for a little bit if we want. All right. Moving on. Let's dive into the back half here, starting with track 7's Iridescent.
Masking out the world until there is no one left alive. There is always someone begging for the
I'm talking about the drums here. Got a little bit of that extra complexity on the tom runs, which really helps drive this forward. Nice little resolution there on that boom, 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 boom. That bass line down there. This is definitely a 3/4 section, not triples and a fourth here. Yeah, you saw how we changed the guitars a little bit in those last few bars before moving into this. The transitions, man. What a neat progression that just was. Really interesting placement of those vocals. sort of behind and a little to the right. One of the few times we've actually had some belted, powerful cleans, and it's like they didn't know what to do with the production of it. I love the way we moved from the more aggressive sections through that transition into this. There's a bit of a serene peace on this. Hey, a standard fade out. Wait, what? Oh my, this band. This band. We have a nice 3-3-2. Oh, nice little accelerando there too. Some dotted notes on their bass kick, providing an interesting syncopation for this section. I really love these rockier moments. Still keeping up the intensity though, especially with the drum work here. See, this was a really nice transition into this idea. Even if I ultimately kind of want them to explore that sound quite a bit more, at least it felt like we naturally got there. It took one of the ideas we were already experiencing and just put it in a new timbre and then made our movement from there into the new idea. Now, this track, no, sorry, the last track, Iridescence, did something new, and I didn't really know that we hadn't done it yet until that moment there. We had some belted vocal work. That's when I noticed that all the clean vocals are very soothing, very airy, even very comfortable speaking range, I'd assume. I don't think that our vocalist is really pushing their range very far. Um, and so we actually had a moment where they kind of went about an octave higher than they usually go and put a ton of, and this is the more important aspect, a ton of air pressure behind it, really giving it volume, impact, width, presence, in a way that we haven't heard before. And I think what was really interesting here was the production on this. It's like they didn't know how to produce this sound. And it felt like the vocalist really wanted this powerful moment, this one moment that at least up till now stands out. The vocalist has never done this. When they wanted more emotion or more energy in the vocals, they switched to screaming. And instead, they wanted this to be clean. They wanted it to be heartfelt in a way that the harsh vocals couldn't. And there was a little bit of, well, not even a little bit. There was enough that I noticed pitch correction on it, where it just went a hair too digital, and I could pick that up on the highest note, the one that he holds out. Um, it's just a hair bit more digital than I think feels natural, and it's behind the listener, off to the left instead of being center channel and in front of the listener, sort of buried in the mix. This feels ethereal in a way. It feels outside of the band in a way. And from that perspective, maybe it makes sense because they are dealing a lot with this sort of ethereal sound throughout a lot of this album. It's all very hazy and misty. And the vocals sort of fit that in this moment, but it's also oddly placed, and it just calls a lot of attention to itself, given that we haven't heard anything that sounds like it, whether it's the performance of it or the production of it. It's very unique in all aspects. And I don't know what to make of it yet. I don't know if any of it dictates the other. Maybe they wanted, well, actually, my perception is he wanted his vocals like this, and the producer, this is how they ended up doing it for whatever reason. And that's why it's different from everything else, because the delivery is different. But yeah, anytime the vocalist wants to have a more impact to the vocals, he switches to screaming. And that makes it a really interesting moment in the track. Um, the rock side of things. I just love it. The entire last minute of this track or so is very feel good. It just has a nice groove to it, a nice rhythm. The vocal line, the melody has a nice hook to it. It's sort of warm in a way that the rest of the track isn't. When we have that gloomier gothic sound, when we have the more aggressive metal sound, this just feels positive, and we don't enter these moments too often. I haven't really brought up that pop angle, the pop rock angle, for a couple of tracks now. We really have focused on more of a gloomier, negative aspect of the album. And it's nice to have a return to this, a little bit of warmth amongst the blue, if you will. I think it was a good place for it, especially moving into our final third of the album. We only have 4 tracks to go. Um, just a really nice outro. Although, of course, any of that positivity is immediately destroyed as we enter more of a dissonant array of sounds off of a toy piano thing. I don't know why I said toy. Was it a toy piano? I don't know. But regardless, the ending of the track, the actual outro of it, ends in quite a bit different direction than the section just before it did. A penultimate section had a bit more brightness to it. The lyrics may lean into that one. We may end up having another gloomy ending to that track. And speaking of emotions, gloom and brightness and positivity, I think at this point I'm kind of done listening on a mostly exclusive critical lens. 8 tracks in, they haven't really changed up their sound much. I think this is just who they are. And with that said, I'm not too sure that there's much to be gained from more critical insight. In fact, the critical insight I've mentioned so far, I think only has so much worth to it as it is. Most of the stuff that I've brought up is probably stuff that most of you have felt on some level or another. The dual vocals, the drumming, the acoustic guitar work, the harmonies. This is a band that's doing things very much on the surface level, and I don't know that there's been much that I've mentioned outside of that that would increase the understanding of this album in a way that most people aren't already aware of. I think the most interesting things I've talked about so far are colors. I guess moving a little bit into like quasi synesthesia there, and how they craft their transitions and why their songs are so fluid. But beyond that, I'm kind of just pointing out the obvious, it feels like a majority of the time. And as I was listening to these last 2 tracks, there were some things I wanted to point out, and I decided to point them out during the reaction exclusively because I don't know that they had much impact on the listening experience as a whole. They were cool moments for sure, but do they drastically change my understanding of the album? No, not really. And I began to think this is really an emotive album. This is something I think that is felt. And I think having these bright white lights in front of me, listening to it in the daytime with sun shining through the blinds. I mean, they're closed. I don't want too much excess light, but the sunlight still comes in. My room is very well lit even without these lights on. This is just the wrong setting to listen to this. This is gloomy. This is hazy. There's a darkness and a sorrow that kind of seeps through all of it. I'm going to try my best with these last 4 tracks to approach them on a more emotional level and see if I can't connect with them better from that direction. With that said, let's hit some lyrics for these two, see where that takes us. Iridescence plays around with the concepts of hopelessness and loneliness in ways that, well, I think some lines work a lot better than others. To lean into this, they seem to have a bit of introspective moment, asking themselves, "Did I see me last night?" But following into the idea that they approach life with the same solitude rite again and again. A rite like a ritual, not like a correctiveness. A solitude rite, a ritual of being alone. It says that it pours over them. There's this one line that cracks me up because it's okay, so like, okay, metal is kind of absurd in a lot of ways, and we've listened to some really absurd metal. Cryptopsy's something something vile. What is that album? None So Vile? That is an album of excess. Excess to the most absurd levels. So I've tried to kind of take metals over the topness on the cheek a bit. Sometimes it can be just a bit much. Um, and sometimes it's the earnesty of the excessiveness that works. This album, I think, lyrically sits on the border. There are some lines that are right on the cusp, but it never really goes over the edge. And this line does. And I laughed. I laughed a bit too much when I read it. It says, "I write a vomit serenade of living yesterdays." And like I get it. There's a visceral element of a vomit serenade, but also writing these love songs to my past life. But not all of them, just the living yesterdays. The ones where I felt I was actually alive and not just a shell of a person in a solitary rite. Is that what it was? Solitude rite. Like, it makes perfect sense. It's just so over the top compared to pretty much anything else I've read on the album so far, that it really caught me off guard. He follows it up though. He says, "Tonight I'll show you that no one wants to listen to a song that really hurts. Who'd ever want to love like a rainbow in the rain? Iridescent but vain." This whole stanza right here is just a hair bit over the top, but I think it really works for this song in particular, even if the initial line caught me off guard initially. It speaks to this person's loneliness. If music is their expression of themselves, and their expression is songs that are filled with pain, and he believes no one wants to see them or hear them, he believes no one wants to see him, no one wants to be around him. It is an extension of himself, and he feels that the music is lonely, so he is also sort of lonely. Even mentioning, "Who would want to love me?" He considers himself, or considers a love with him, to be a rainbow in the rain. And so a lot of this is just about dealing with being alone all the time. He speaks at one time, he says, "I thought you would lie next to me in this bed of swallowed time," which I think is interesting. He wants this physical contact. Maybe even just being in the presence of somebody, just lie in this bed with me, right? Kind of idea. But he refers to the bed as swallowed time, pairing a positive aspect with a negative, really allowing any of the brightness that he wants to feel here to be swallowed up by the gloom that he pairs with it. It's a song about loneliness and trying to combat that and feeling not good enough to not be lonely. It's a heavy track. I wonder what line was it that he belted. Which one of these do I think would gain the most out of an impact like that? I don't know. Sound Odyssey is an exceptionally vague, short lyrical track that could be read as a voyage or an odyssey of self-discovery. We begin it says, "Hoist the sails of the night, sail your ships towards the horizon of the sound. Where are your rhymes you suavely sang in the morning? And the morning will come again." The idea that we're going on a big journey, and whoever the "your" is, he could be speaking to himself or to someone else, that they're not as chipper as they were yesterday, or even just this morning, or maybe the next morning, that time is continuing to move. Says, "I land ashore in your city's morning gray, screaming out its wreckage, screaming out loud. So I close my eyes in sorrow and back away." He lands on a city and it is just ransacked. There's wreckage everywhere. He closes his eyes and he absorbs the sorrow of the entire thing. It says, "I had experienced the wonders of your light. I had seen this during the best moments. And I'm witness to your passage through these times, and there's no regret at all. It's just fine. The acceptance of the way things go, that there is life and death, and you might be around a person or a place during its heights, and you may find them at their death as well. And you have to accept that that is the nature of life, is to end." He says, "While the vessel still keeps sailing on forward to the ultimate star, where your inner essence, we're told, resides across the seven seas, this odyssey is my plight." Whatever this task is, it's going to be long, it's going to be difficult, and I'm going to stick with it. Talking about, again, searching for the inner essence at the ultimate star, which I think is where it could be read as a search for self-discovery or even self-acceptance in a way, but not quite finding it yet. All right, next up we have Cantus Christi. We're going to dive into this one. It's one of the longer ones. Yeah, we'll see where it takes us.
Cantus Christi vow, last today say farewell to you. I can see it now, from a high as if I were you.
Really nice triplet vibe within the slower tempo that he's singing in. So this would be the 4. But there's a triplet feel within that. It's a very powerful moment right here. A rare harsh transition. Okay. The drummer's just showing off in that last passage.
quite a bit of dissonance here as well. It's something they use very sparingly on this album. I love the vocals off on the side, really creating this wall of human voices, of human sounds surrounding the vocalist here. For many songs of isolation, I think it's really nice to have that closeness and boxing in of other human sounds, of other people around you. Just a beautiful moment that pairs really well with our opening. I don't think it's the same idea, but it's a very similar progression. It's the same vibe. Oh, no resolution. What a beautiful ending to this track. Very warm, optimistic, drastic change of pace from many of the tracks. It almost sounded like they were supposed to go together. Someone let me know if the gaps are a streaming platform thing, and that maybe the CD or the album is very different. What is this? What a change. power to this, a lot of energy. Where everything else kind of feels lethargic and held back, even in the faster sections, this is driving. Long intro too. Thought I heard bells, but there's something twinkling back there. Like finding bliss or resolution after so much work. Her beauty blooms through patience. That's not an organ, is it? That's a kill switch on a guitar. It's really interesting. I think if I had found this album 15 years ago, well, I guess around the time it came out, yeah, I think I would have been all over this. I really do. Primarily because my ears were younger then, and I think some of the stuff that I find jarring now I wouldn't have back then, which is really weird to say. I think the more seasoned your ears get, you think that you would find more styles of music palatable instead of the reverse. Yeah, so maybe I have gone backwards. Regardless, there is a very palpable longing in this album. Everything is about how something could just be better around the corner. We just got to get there. And some songs are like, I never get around the corner. I know there's positive things somewhere around me. I just don't know where to look. And that gloom, that negativity isn't just an aspect of these songs. Atmospherically, it's very much a drive of the lyrics too. And back then, I loved stuff like this. I probably wouldn't have even needed to know the words. The atmosphere itself, I think, would have sold younger me. Somewhere along the lines, just kind of got out of that. I don't want to say that I grew out of it. I don't think that's, well, I don't think it's accurate, but I also don't think that that's a good way to think about art, is that some expressions are designated for certain age groups. I think that's dumb. But I did get out of it at some point, and on the whole, I'm not too interested in listening to melancholic music too often these days. Um, and I don't know how much of that is nature or nurture. Did I stop liking it? Or did I realize the world is so grim I don't need it anymore? You know, I don't know. And people deal with stuff differently. Some people might listen to this because it helps things feel more sane around them. I don't know. But for me, I get enough negativity just by experiencing life that I don't necessarily need it in my art either. Or I don't need it in my art also. But yeah, there was a time I think I would have been completely sold on this album, and it would have been around the time it came out. Particularly because it's so multifaceted while still retaining this gloominess and finding ways to break all of that as well. It is at its heart doomy in a lot of ways, but it's also not. I've brought up emo a couple of times. I've brought up grunge. They have a very strong rock component throughout this entire album. Um, and even this song right here, Zenith, is a track that feels exceptionally hopeful. The track as a whole has energy, it's driving. It feels like it has been in the rays of the sun. For an album so cold, this one track feels like a firework, illuminating a dark night. So much energy at the beginning, which is the journey of the firework blasting into the sky at such a speed and then finally detonating into something that releases this calming effect to all around them. We've had a couple of songs, not a majority, but one or two that have focused on more positive elements lyrically as well. And there is a romantic side to this with, what's that, Nascence? Yeah, I think it was. Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I noticed that because we had a pause there. What track? Oh, come on, are you serious? I gotta look this up real quick, 'cause I think this is an interesting coincidence here. I just gotta double check. Our guest vocalist was on Nascence. So Nascence was the love song. That was the one with the female vocal duet about moving my hands through your hair and wanting to spend all of time together. And even after this moment ends, I'll remember it forever and ever and ever. And the very next track is Iridescence. I'm so lonely. How could anyone ever love me? I think it's interesting to put those back to back because a majority of these have been, yes, loneliness has been an aspect of it, but it hasn't been a romantic loneliness. It's been more of, I just want people in my life, dang it. And the two tracks so far that seem to focus on a romantic relationship or a romantic loneliness are also the very, they're just offset by one song to be the very middle, but they're put right next to each other. I wonder if that was purposeful or not. But yeah, I was gonna say there is a romantic side to it as well, which would have really connected with me back in my emo phase, which 15 years ago. All this connected really well, or would have connected with me. And it's one of those things, just it would have been the right place, right time, and today is not that. I missed my opportunity, I think, to have a very powerful connection with this album. And that's not to say again that I'm disliking this in any capacity. I am enjoying my time with it. The atmospheres are fantastic. There are some sections that I just absolutely love. Their transitions are some of the best I've heard in the genre. Um, they do a lot of things really well. Just right now is not the time for me to really dig into this. And like I said earlier, uh, you know, some albums bounce off of you. You come back to them years later and you're like, man, this is so good. What was I thinking back then? And this might be one of those. Maybe if I'm feeling really glum one day, this might be exactly what I need to really connect with that and break out of it or just to be in it and accept it. But today is not that day. This is also an instrumental. Cantus Christi was cool too because it brought in a little bit of a hymnic element to its bookends, its opening and ending that I really enjoyed. Once again, it had a bit of a positive flair to both sides of it. Can't wait to dig into the lyrics there. And the middle is really aggressive all the way through almost. So that track, I'm curious what they're going to be going into. This is mostly an instrumental. I think it's the first one on the album. It's the only one on the album, maybe. We'll find out next time when we finish these last two tracks. But I really appreciate what they're doing here. I mean, first of all, it focuses entirely on the music, the atmosphere, and their transitions. I mean, this is their three strongest aspects, and they just absolutely knocked this track out of the park. I already mentioned that I feel like it's the warmest as well. It's the most positive song. And even just looking at the lyrics right here, it says, "It seems so long, shining bright." And I think that could be read so two different ways. My more positive read of it is that, I've been shining brightly for so long. But I think the more negative read would have been, it seems so long since I've been shining bright, or since the last time I saw something shining bright. But the music in Zenith primarily made me think about the more positive side of things. So I like to read it that way as well. Let me take a moment to dig into Cantus Christi's lyrics, and then we're going to head into the final stretch. All right, Cantus Christi. Lyrics here seem to be about the passing of somebody, the narrator, the main character, and them speaking about the afterlife in a bit of a positive manner. It says, today I say farewell to you. I can see me now from a height as if I were you. I turn to Zenith now, which of course is going to be the next track. It says, all there is the scent of you. Some nostalgia in here. It says, I can see me now as today I say farewell to you. Speaks about being able to take a retreat from the chance of clocks passing time. Doesn't have to worry about time anymore. It says, behind a crowd of clouds bathed in sun, I behold these pictures to you. And that's how it goes. A song always comes to an end, then a few more bits of silence. All life ends. Speaks about hopefully this other person that they're talking about moving on. It says, in a composition of stagnant water and seagulls sad, I bring your laughter back to light. So hopefully when you go out, to the beach or whatever, and you see the water just sort of sitting still and the seagulls are cawing in the sky, hopefully that reminds you of me and brings a smile back to your face. It says, and your life, which you always felt is stolen, it's always been there, just afraid of blooming. A very positive idea about remembrance, nostalgia, and moving on, accepting the death of a loved one. Once again, fitting very well with the themes of the album so far. Alright, with all that said, let's move on, as we've already touched on Zenith's lyrics just a hair bit. We're going to move into our final two tracks, looking at a combined runtime of 12 minutes. We have Argentic into Deorbit. Let's see what they're going to do with the finale to the album.
I leave the sunlight with my hands, knowing there's to be some reason for this ever coming time.
Really leaning into the grunge sound right here. I guess particularly a post-grunge sound, but playing around with a lot more offbeat accents on this track than we've ever heard before. Keeping it a little light and bouncy. Even the harmonic quality is a bit on the brighter side with this one.
This
those are wider vocal harmonies too. Interesting section that almost seems afraid of silence. For as little as each individual part plays and how much space they allow, we never really hit quiet. We always have the cymbal on a really fast rhythm. Beautiful intertwining of lines there. Another very sharp tempo shift. Continuing to fill this space, more guitars, more layers, bigger sounds. Oh, what a great little lick to put there. Really wanted to drive home that levity, that bounciness. Great way to do it. And still kind of retaining that energy. We felt like we were coming off of Argentic's higher energy, but we slipped back into the somberness that the album's been within. Really interesting listening to the drum consistently speed up and slow down within the same tempo. There's something very comforting about that last section. I'm not sure what it quite is. I really want to know what the lyrics are, because emotionally this doesn't feel like the ending I thought they were going towards. So much weight lifted off my shoulders with this solo section right here. Argentic was a massive change of pace. I really enjoyed that entire track, really taking a strong positive light that we had at the end of Zenith and further exploring it in more of a traditional sense, moving away from the instrumental vibe and the linear flow and looking at more of a traditional structure versus chorus thing going on. Um, I really like that. I think Cantus, Christi, Zenith, and Argentic are a fantastic trilogy here on this album. And that's, man, that might be my favorite sections here. Yeah, if I had to pick a track that was my favorite, I'm cheating here, but I'd pick that trilogy. All three of them just work really well at creating a little narrative. Cantus Christie's hymnic start with the massive rise in intensity, kind of coming back down and still being rather somber, moving into Zenith's, like I mentioned, the firework
going up and detonating positivity around everyone. Such a weird metaphor. And then Argentic's reveling within this. For an album that has been so focused on gloomy atmosphere, those three together really paint a picture of ascension in a lot of ways. And Deorbit starts off with that, and I really thought we were going to stick with this idea and quickly returns back to form, going from more of a gloomy middle into an ending that I'm not 100% sure what my read is on. In a sense, I feel like it is unresolved. But there is an element of resolution in that final tone. It just isn't exactly where I felt that the chord progression was pointing towards as a home. In a sense, it might be a half resolution. And that's what makes me really want to dig into the lyrics right now about Deorbit and see what's going on there, because it doesn't go where I expected it to go, which is, I mean, that's how I started this whole journey off, is kind of being a bit out of the loop with their intentions. But it seems here, even at the end, they're still keeping secrets from me, keeping me on my toes. And I find that really exciting about this whole experience of digging through this album. Something that I haven't really touched on yet is the guitar solos. And I noticed it right here, and it lines up with a lot of what I've said throughout this. I've mentioned the vocal lines, the melodies being rather catchy and nice to listen to, even in the more somber moments. I've talked about their smoothness of transitions, and if we bring both of these together, we can speak about how melodic lines flow, the pacing, and how they transition into new ideas, which is that's a solo line. So when we talk about the guitar solo, everything that they showcase in their works on a larger scale is just condensed down into a minute or minute and a half in the case of Deorbit solo. And it's just really gorgeous. I think this band really excels at this aspect of writing, which is melody and harmony. The rhythmic side of the album doesn't really venture too far in many directions. It really stays where it's most comfortable. But I was going to say, see, we hear a lot of harmonic devices throughout this album. It takes us in a variety of different ways emotionally. A lot of them, even within one feeling, they still find multitudes of expression within. Melodically, there are hooks and riffs and just really nice lines all over the place. There's counterpoint, there's harmony. I mean, these are the places that they really excel, their transitions. And that final solo I thought was a really nice way to showcase what this band is good at. If someone was like, what are they good at? I'll just point them to that solo. You get to hear everything, the melody writing, the movement between ideas. There's a little bit of harmony in there as well. And it's just a really nice atmosphere crafted between it and the rest of the instruments. It is, in a nutshell, a fantastic description of what this band does well. And I thought it was really nice to end with that. I don't think we had vocals after that. I think that really was the last lead line, because after that we had the little bit of ornamental stuff, the false ending, and then the true ending, which was odd. But honestly, if the ending made sense, I'd be a bit confused, because my experience with this album is that the endings are all a bit odd. And, thematically, lyrically, this is an album about endings. A lot of it returns to the endings of relationships, the endings of life, the endings of moments of a life, segments or eras, we can look at them. It's all about something coming to an end or thinking about the end.
wanting things to end. And endings are usually in life fairly anticlimactic. They sort of just happen sometimes, or things are left unresolved. I wonder if that's what they were going for on this. If so, that's high level, and I applaud them for it. It's so high level, I only came upon it at the end of the album. And I don't know how many people would come upon it on their first listen at all. I almost missed it entirely. So, wow, that makes me sound conceited. I almost didn't do it, so I don't know anyone else who could have. I'm so good at my job. Uh, but yeah, if that's what they're going for, I appreciate that extra layer that they put in there, because otherwise I really can't figure out what they're going for in most of their endings. They're abrupt. They introduce new items or new ideas and then just don't fully explore them. Some endings feel a bit more natural. One of them, I don't remember, what was it? Sound Odyssey into Cantus Christi, that sounded like they were supposed to go back to back and they didn't. And I asked if the album was like that, if that was just like a Spotify thing. Yeah, just the endings as a whole are not great, but maybe that's intentional, especially given how everything else is just so good. Um, just a quick recap here. I mean, the drumming is fantastic here. They really get to show off. The guitar work doesn't show off as much, but the guitars are so responsible for creating the atmosphere and feelings and emotions and transitions. They have a lot of jobs here that aren't show off my crazy skills, that I think they might be a little underappreciated if you're not looking for all the ways that they are putting in work. What they do isn't flashy, but it is so important to crafting this album. Dual vocals everywhere. Harmonized cleans, heavies versus cleans, just all of it. I love so many sections of it. I've already mentioned the atmosphere, their transitions, all this stuff they do exceptionally well. And I love the inclusion of the acoustic guitar in many of the metal sections here. I think it adds a really nice timbre into the mix. So, and then their harmonic ideas, the chords they use, like these are the notes I listed on the positive side. I think they are exceptionally consistent with all of that too, which is very impressive. They have a skill set and they lean into it very well, and you can tell that they have a lot of experience under their belt, due to not only the ability to pull this off once, twice, three times, but 12 times over on this album, and probably more when you check out their other albums, their one previous or the one that comes after. They know what they're doing. They know they're good at it, and they just pull it off flawlessly. It almost seems effortless at times, even just to sit within this mood and find ways to showcase it that were different than the ones we just listened to. All right, the journey is coming to a close. Let's check out these lyrics. Well, interestingly, the music doesn't quite follow the arc I felt. Sorry, the lyrics don't follow the arc I felt in the music. This coming off of Zenith, which was spoken about in Cantus Christi, moving towards Zenith. I saw that Cantus Christi was sort of this person had passed away and are moving towards the light, finding something more positive in their afterlife. And Zenith sort of confirmed that with a lot of its musical choices. Of course, it was an instrumental, so there were less concrete ideas to really base it off of, but the music overall felt very positive, and Argentic followed in those footsteps for a majority of it. It was quite a bit poppier, bouncier, it had a lot more accented rhythms to it. It felt livelier than the rest of the album did, and it's lyrically following along in a lot of the same patterns we had seen previously. It opens up, it says, I lit the sunlight with my hands, knowing there's to be some reason for this ever coming dark. there is still this darkness. I haven't beaten it, I've only pushed it back, and it is coming my way. Although I'm in the sunlight, I've lit the sunlight with my hands. There is sunlight around me. He says, but all I want is to find a way for these cardboard wings to fly their blackened feathers up again. I'm just looking for a way to get off the ground, find that joy in flight once again, that freedom. We shift paces quite a bit though. He says, oh, my naked angel face, now it is my turn to drag you to tomorrow. All your light faded away because you've given all your strength you've had to someone else. And what I'm getting from this, I don't know if this album is narratively conceptual or just conceptual, where like it all explores similar vibes. I would not say that there was a narrative through line on all of this up until we hit Cantus, Christi, Zenith, and Argentic, which all three of these seem to have elements in their lyrics that speak to this if you look at them on a more literal level, with Zenith being the ascension towards the afterlife, Cantus Christi being the ascension to the afterlife, directly mentioning Zenith, which feels like being in the afterlife, the warmth of ethereal living, I suppose. And now we have, again, if we take this literally, wings, and we're trying to escape this darkness. If that is to be true, then the person who was mourning the narrator in Cantus Christi, was it? Has now lost their will to live. They've given all of their strength to someone else, and their light has faded away. And so he says, now it's my turn to take you to tomorrow, getting ready to cross them over to the afterlife as well. Says, touch me and relieve me from the plague of sorrow. Touch me and heal me with your silver colors. And I think this is interesting because it kind of alludes back to Iridescence, when he spoke about how much he just wanted contact with people. And this is a very physical element. He says, touch me. That's it. Just put your hand to mine. And you can take away my plague of sorrows. You can heal me with your vibrancy, with your silver colors. It almost feels, once again, that we're exploring elements of loneliness and feeling lost that we've been checking out this entire album. At the end, he says, I've reached the sun myself and found nothing there to clear the reason for this ever-coming gray. Another interesting way to word it, but the idea is I went to the sun, which is the source of light. Like, as far as natural light goes in our existence, this is it. Like, everything else is artificial ish. I mean, it's all made with science of like gases and electricity and all stuff. It's naturalist, but we've distorted it. The sun gives us natural light. We don't have to do anything to it. It just naturally does that for us. He says, I went to that source and I still found no way to defeat this blackness that's coming for me. He says, and all that's left is to find the way back to the fields of silver colors you once used to share with me. So without any way to defeat this upcoming darkness, I have to find a way back to nostalgia, remembrance of the past. It's all I have left. Nothing ahead of me, just what's behind me. It ends once again on a very downtrodden level, much like everything else on the album, which makes Deorbit's feelings make more sense to me. Remember, I mentioned that Argentic was sort of a high point coming off of Zenith, but it isn't. It dips back down by the end of it, so Deorbit's return back to the somber atmosphere makes a lot of sense. And again, I don't know if any of this is supposed to be taken narratively, where it is a series of events in order, But these final few tracks are a bit more connected than any of the other ones, which all feel disconnected in story but connected in theme. Now, this is fascinating. We completely ditch many of the, I don't want to say trite, but commonly used ideas and phrases. There's been a very romantic edge to a lot of the ways that he speaks about his loneliness and his need for people and his depression and all of this. We kind of ditch all of that for a very cold, calculated, sci-fi-esque metaphor in this one. It is a massive departure that I think is necessary to tell the story that is happening here. We're not only departing from more of a fantastical interpretation to a more grounded one, but we're moving from the realm of fantasy in his mind to the reality of what happened. And I think this is fantastic. This song is about finding the truth in the darkness and embracing it. It opens, it says, the shadow of the earth, abyssing your lonely water visage, giving us a breather from the yoke of the star before utter oppression restarts. The shadows from the sun give me a breather, gives me relief, a weight off my shoulders, finally not trying to evade the darkness in search of lights. I'm just taking it in, and honestly, it's not that bad. That kind of vibe. He says metaphorically that he launches a parade of satellites into the sky. They're made of steel and chrome, and the screams propagating through the coldness of the outer space. It's a message no one is going to get there in the infinite abyss of the night, and not making a noise, we quietly deorbit. The idea of just screaming out into the void, no matter how loud it is, no matter how amplified it is, you're not going to be reaching anybody. And I love this idea of screams being sent out through radio waves or satellite waves or whatever and not making a noise. Screams so loud and yet not loud enough. What's interesting then is not that. From this point, at least, it's still very similar to the other vibes of the stories we've seen. I'm so alone and no one's anywhere near me, right? This is not that different. But the shift in metaphor, in style, in delivery are all drastically different, and it alludes to where we're going next. It says, and my friends of the other side was the witness to that miscarriage, but the truth was not by my side. I was blinded from all those dark things. So the night that I let you go astray, I couldn't see the full extent of all the hate that followed. The event that led all of my friends to leave me, that left me alone and full of all this pain. It wasn't something that they did. I made a mistake. It says, truth was not on my side. I was blinded by all those dark things, which I think is really cool. Blinded by the dark. But also just being blinded by jealousy or rage or whatever. Not being able to see the truth and just digging your feet in when you are in the wrong and causing everyone around you to leave. And because of that, I ended up blaming everyone else and fell into this pit of despair that the whole album has kind of been leaning on. And here at the end, there's this massive, what's that word? When you come upon an idea. Anyways, they did it. And they realized a massive realization. Here we go. That it was them all along that put themselves in this situation. They have no one to blame but themselves. Hopefully, at this point in the narrative, even if this isn't a narrative, everything sort of ties together. Okay, just go with me on this one. At this point in the narrative, I really hope this person recognizes this and continues towards a path of healing instead of slipping back into the darkness like they've alluded to in the opening line, that they find comfort in it now. What an album. Yeah, I'm in drastically better place with this than when we started. As usual, I mean, when it comes, well, not as usual, but occasionally when it comes to this, I'm really happy that I've been forced to listen to this whole thing, because this is certainly an album that, even by track 5, wasn't really clicking with me. And I think in any other situation, I would have tossed it in the abandoned pile. And I do have a list of albums I've abandoned. Um, I know some people jokingly give me some grief over it, but I have limited time on this planet, and I have a lot of music to listen to. If you ain't working with me in 20 minutes, there's a good chance you ain't gonna work with me by the end, but that's not a guarantee, is it? And so while it does save me, usually, there are those cases where I might be missing out on something rather well, that is certainly a bigger picture kind of idea. And I think that's where this is. In fact, some of the more chaotic elements of the first track might make more sense if we see it as the genesis point of this. The moment when things fell apart and the blame had begun to be put on others. I don't know if that's necessarily how it works. I'd have to go back, look at the lyrics, listen to it again, all that jazz. But if so, this actually works on a much higher level than I anticipated, and paired with the way that the endings are and the higher level reading I have of those, I do think that with subsequent listens I will find a much higher appreciation for this album than I even do now, and I really dig what they're doing by the end of it. It really works on the larger whole. There's sections throughout I feel that it does kind of get a bit samey, and I think the middle, nothing particularly about the middle. I think it's just I began to get a bit fatigued by their bread and butter sound. I think that's just because it's not typically my kind of music, but I don't know that I would change a bit of this. Other than the production, I especially track 2, man. That middle section in track 2 would be beautiful. Well, actually, now that I know what it's all about, though, album wise, I think maybe the claustrophobic feeling of it is better. I don't know. Like I said, I need a second listen of this whole album to really have a stronger grasp on it. Right now, I've reached level 1, which is appreciation. Level 2, which might require another listen or 2 or 3, would be understanding, and I'm not there yet. Those are my thoughts on November's The Blue. Let me know yours down in the comment section. Give me your thoughts, perspectives, opinions. If you have things you want to add on to what I said, or correct me on, or give me totally different viewpoints on, let me know. Put all that stuff down there. Above that, in the description box, is a link for Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. I want y'all to know this is one of the longer videos I've made. Sitting at 3:30 recorded, 3 hours and 30 minutes recorded, but it is 2:10 right now, and I started recording at 9:15. The lyrics, the lyrics took me some time, and I did take a break in the middle to get some food and recharge the old brain. But honestly, a vast majority of that time was dedicated to this album in some way or another, whether it was on camera or off. Just a massive undertaking on my part. I mean, that puts me at five hours almost on the dot for this. So I hope y'all appreciate it. If you don't, that's fine too, I suppose. Really, only one person I hope appreciates it, and they're the person who wanted the album checked out. If anybody else appreciates this video, it's just a plus in my books. Where are we going with this? Tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. What does that put us at? 3 p.m. UTC. We have our live stream. It's open for everybody, but the songs are pre-selected. It'll be our last one for the month, which means I think we have an extra song on it. It might run over a little over the 2-hour mark. And then Monday, we'll be back with next week. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.